This is an intro. Who needs an intro? I don't need an intro. This is just a vape show. It's just a vape show. Vape show. This is an intro. Who needs an intro? I don't need an intro. This is just a vape show. It's just a vape show. Vape show.
YouTube, what is up? I'm your homeboy Josh, back at you with a build video. And today we're going to be throwing together a Helix coil for a brand new RDA called the Evolve RDA. So for this build, we're going to be using all nichrome wire. We're going to be using our 24 gauge, our 32 gauge, our 40 gauge, and our 36 gauge. We're going to be using pliers, we're going to be using wire clippers, we're going to be using ceramic tweezers, we're going to be using our swivel tools. Of course, we'll need our screwdrivers for putting our coil together. I've got my magnified goggles here so we can save my eyesight in the process. We're good to go. We're going to need our drill, and we're going to be using the vise as well. So the first thing that we're going to make to start out this build is a fused Clapton coil, a micro fused Clapton coil actually, using 32 gauge cores, 2 cores, and 40 gauge for the fuse. We're going to take our 32 gauge, we're going to go ahead and pull off enough wire to make a dual coil here. So we're going to pull off about 3 times around, ought to do it. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to straighten that on out with our drill. Basically, we're going to anchor one end into the drill, and taking the other end, we're going to go ahead and pull it on out with the pliers here. Then we're just going to let it rip with the drill until it's all straightened out. What comes next, we're going to loop that straightened wire through one of the ends of our swivel tools, and we're going to go ahead and anchor the opposite end on into the drill. From here, we're ready to go ahead and make our micro fused Clapton. So we're going to take our 40 gauge wire and we're going to tie it off against one of the ends of the wire sticking out of the chuck. And from there, we're just going to let it rip. When I'm working with wire that's this small, 40 gauge wire and whatnot, I kind of really want to be able to see what I'm doing because I want to make sure that I'm doing it nice and clean. I want to make sure that that Clapton is as clean as it possibly can, meaning that there's no gaps in those wraps of the wire there. I want that to just be like a smooth, seamless wire just made up of 2 cores of wire and this 40 gauge wrapped around them. I want that wire to be as clean as possible. So what I find works for me is to use these goggles, these magnified goggles, preferably with a light on the end of them. And that helps me to see what I'm doing. It helps me save my eyesight a bit. And then, like clockwork, usually about halfway through, no matter how hard I try not to pull on that wire so hard, I always run into the problem where I've pulled too hard and that wire snaps. And it snaps at the chuck every single time. And this is what happens. And I've got to go ahead and I've got to fix that wire back into the chuck so I can pick up where I left off. And what I'll do is I'll just wrap up the wire as best I can back onto the spool, anchor it onto the spool. Then I'll go ahead and I'll take that wire, put a little bend in it first, and then put it on back into the chuck of the drill. And then from there, I can basically pick up where I left off, just so that there's not any sort of run in the wire, any sort of part where the wire is too messed up. What I'll do is I'll back out the wire a little bit, enough so that it pulls it taut again. And from there, I'll just let it rip again. And usually I can get from there to the end of the wire without it snapping again. It just always snaps right when I get to about the middle. I don't know why that is. Then coming up on the end over here, what I'll do is I'll just let it wrap back on itself a little bit so that that wire is good and tight and it's not going to unravel at the end. Just a tiny, tiny bit, maybe about a centimeter's worth is how far I'll back up on itself. And that's all I'll do. From there, I've made my fused Clapton and we can move on to the next step. But before I do, I always like to go ahead, take a quick look at the wire, see how that fused Clapton came out, admire my work a little bit, make sure it came out to my liking. You know, like I said, I want to make sure that this is as clean as possible when I'm making this wire, especially when I'm going to be incorporating this wire into a build. When it's not just the wire itself, it's got to be good and clean, or else, you know, that can mess up the rest of the build. Okay, I think we're good. Looks nice and clean. So to straighten the wire out, because there are a few spots where it seems to have turned a little bit, you know, parts where it seems to twist on itself just a little bit. And for this build, we really need this wire to be as straight as possible. It's not something that we can straighten out as we're coiling the wire around a screwdriver or something like that. We really need the wire to be straight as possible. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll take the pliers and I'll just hold the pliers enough to apply enough pressure that it's not going anywhere, but I don't want to crush the wire with the pliers either. What would be really nice here are some nylon pliers, or if I wasn't too lazy, what I'd do is I'd take some masking tape and wrap it around the teeth of the pliers so it wouldn't damage the fused Clapton, and just hold it nice and tight with that, tight enough that it's not going to slip, and then just let the drill rip a few times. And then, you know, look at it, watch what it's doing, make sure it's not twisting more, just make sure it's untwisting a bit. And then just do that a few times until it's nice and straight wire. From there, we're going to take some 24 gauge. We're going to stretch it out so it's roughly around the same length as the fused Clapton that we've made. And we're going to go ahead and straighten it all out. Same thing, straighten it out, anchor it on into the chuck of the drill, grab one end with the pliers, and just let it rip so it's nice and straight. So we're going to seat our fused Clapton right alongside our straightened 24 gauge into the chuck of the drill. And I think what we're going to do here, you can do this just with pliers, but I think what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and use our vise here just to make it extra clean and extra tight. What we're going to do is we're going to use our vise and we're going to put the other end of these wires on into the vise grip. And from there, we're going to be able to have a little bit more control over how this wire twists. Just making sure that it twists up nice and clean and it doesn't bunch in any particular area. So I can hold this drill as tight as I possibly can and hold the vise with my other hand just to stabilize it. And then let that drill rip until it's twisted to my liking. And then we've got a fused Clapton twisted with some 24 gauge. But we're not done just yet. Next, we are going to take our 36 gauge nichrome and we're going to helix this wire, which means in the spaces between the 24 gauge and the 32 gauge, those spaces where they line up and meet, that little crevice that's created, we're going to go back over that with the 36 gauge. And we're actually going to do it twice. So it's helixed on both sides. So it's a double helix coil here. And we're going to helix into the gaps that this twisted wire created with our 36 gauge. You want to sort of get just the right angle so it goes on easy. And once we do it for one of those gaps, we're going to go ahead, we're going to go back, we're going to do it again for the other gap. So it gets the gap on both sides. And when all is said and done, our wire looks something like this. Helix wire. It's a twisted wire essentially, but it's got something a little bit different, a little spin on a twisted wire essentially is what it is a helix. That's the way I like to think of it. So we're going to start building our coils now. We made enough for a dual coil, so that worked out great. We're going to be using a 3mm bit today because I want to know if a 3mm bit can fit in this particular RDA, so that's what we're doing. Well, twisted bills, sometimes they can wrap kind of loose, you know. They have like a little bit of, you know, stretch and give to them. So what I like to do is wrap them good and tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the vise here. We're going to anchor one end of the wire down into the vise. We're going to take our 3mm screwdriver and we're going to go ahead and wrap a coil, pulling it tight as we go. It keeps the wire good and tight and it keeps the coil in shape. I think what we're going to do is 6 wraps here. So that's one coil. And that's our other coil. So here we've got our coils wrapped. We're ready to go. We're ready to mount it in this new RDA, the Evolve RDA. It's an unusual RDA, as you can see. I've got a review for this RDA coming up very shortly. With this deck, these post holes are sort of angled outward and the leads meet up on either end of the coil together over here on the side. So it's sort of an unusual way of building. So I want to know if we can put a helix coil in here, and I want to know if we can make it with a 3mm bit. So that's what we're going to find out today. As you build one coil, I've found it easier to go ahead and clip off the excess on the wire before placing my second coil in there. It just clears out the room on that shared exit port, I guess you'd call it, where, you know, I don't have to struggle with, you know, wire coming against wire and meeting like that and preventing one lead from going on in through the post. So it makes it a little bit easier for me to go ahead and clip off the wires as I go, rather than all together like I would with a lot of other RDAs. So what I've found in building the Evolve RDA, what seems to work the best is to anchor in one lead and then anchor in the other lead afterwards. In much the same way as some RDAs, their decks benefit from leaving one lead long and the other lead short so you can slip it on into the post holes really easy. The Evolve RDA is much the same, except it's more of a requirement than anything else really, I think, because what I've found is I can get one lead into the post terminal relatively easy, but the other one takes a little bit of finagling, a little bit of angling to get it on in there. Sometimes in the middle of building the RDA, I will, after seating my first lead, come back and clip the other lead shorter, just so I can fit it on into that post terminal a little bit more easily. But this RDA gets a lot easier to build the more and more you build it, as is true in most RDAs. This is actually the third build I'm putting on this RDA, and already I can tell you it's way easier the third time than it was the second time than it was the first time. The first time almost didn't happen. From there, it's just a matter of shaping up our coils, using our screwdriver to go ahead and reshape our coils, reposition our coils, make them as good and uniform and symmetrical as we possibly can. Satisfied with that, now we can start shaping our coils using our ceramics tweezers, getting everything glowing evenly. And to do that, what I'll do is I'll generally start heating up the wire very, very slowly at first at a low wattage, just to make sure that I'm not going to blow out the coil or anything like that, that the hot spots are not going to blow out the coil. Because sometimes more complex coils like this, they can, the hot spots can really undo you. They can be your undoing if you're not careful with a hot spot. So I'll work the coil out very slowly at first, strumming, working the bit, the screwdriver in and out a few times, just making everything light up nice and uniform before I go ahead and let it rip. And then once it's ready to go, I go ahead and turn it up so that coil is going to hit a nice hot wattage. This is actually turned up to about 100 watts or so, and let it rip. The way that 24 gauge heats up first, and then almost instantaneously after that, so does the Helix wire and the fused Clapton wire. But that 24 gauge just gets a little kick just before everything else. Before I wick my builds, I always like to put a little bit of juice onto the coil just to cool down that coil so I don't burn myself wicking it, and also so it doesn't burn out the cotton. Today we're wicking this coil with some Kendo vape cotton. This is the new Kendo vape cotton, putting that through its paces. Working it out so it's nice, thick, ample cotton in this build because it can be a really, really thirsty couple of coils here. Do you see how the juice just bubbles up in the spaces between the wraps of the wires and the twists of the wires here? How that juice just fizzes out almost. This is a flavor build, guys. This is a yummy, tasty flavor build. That's what a Helix coil is. From there, we'll go ahead and lock our top cap into place against the deck. We'll go put our airflow sleeve into place. We're just going to go ahead and put the standard drip tip connection top cap down on top of this, and I'll see you guys up top side. We'll vape on it. We'll talk about it. That, guys, is a Helix coil, and they make for wonderful flavor builds that you can make in so many different ways. This one was a micro fused Clapton, 2 strands of 32 gauge, fused with 40 gauge, that was twisted with some 24 gauge, and then the key comes in with helixing. I just used some 36 gauge wire to helix, but you can do it with all kinds of things. I mean, the possibilities are pretty endless. I mean, that's what makes a Helix coil so much fun. There are so many different ways to do it, and this is just a simple one, okay? But it produces amazing flavor, produces very nice clouds as well. It's a very, very fun build to make is what it is. There's something fun for me about twisting those wires together and then helixing into the gaps. It's therapeutic almost, you know, it really is. That Evolve RDA, something really unique here. I really enjoy building on this. Now that I have a better understanding of how to go about building it, I actually enjoy it a whole lot more. I'm looking forward to doing the full review on this guy very, very shortly. It could be up as early as tomorrow or the next day. It's not going to be long, guys. I'm excited to show you all the ins and outs of it, tell you my final thoughts on it. But I just wanted to throw up this build video so I could show you guys what I was working with, because it's a fun build. Vaping on some more Earl today. This juice is amazing. This is the second bottle I bought, and I only bought a 30 ml because they were out of 120 mils. That's the only reason I bought a 30 ml bottle. And it was in 6, and I vaped 3, and they only had 6. So it was like, what can I do? I bought it in a 6, and I bought it in a 30 ml because I needed it. I needed this juice. I need a constant supply of this juice. Okay, this is amazing. Wicking it this way, it just creates this perfect well for the juice right there. It's awesome. Awesome. Got it turned up to 100 watts. It's sitting on the Axis Vapes N17 mod. Yeah. Fucking delicious. Delicious. 0.17 ohm build. And it's just, flavor is just phenomenal. The clouds are wonderful. I mean, it's just a great, great vape. Those coils are massive. Those 3mm coils, they went in here, no problem whatsoever. They vape fantastic. It's just a nice, hot vape, flavorful vape. Plenty of clouds, plenty of flavor. I love Helix coils because I love twisted builds. I really do. And, you know, mix it up. Put some variety in there. Mix it up with some Claptons. Mix it up with some, I don't know, some twisted wires. Twisted wires on twisted wires. You can throw an alien in there. You can do all kinds of things with a Helix build. It's just pretty much endless possibilities. That juice, that build, this RDA, it's awesome. Awesome. What can I say? Yeah, fun build. Anyway, guys, till next time, I'm your homeboy Josh. Vape on, vapors.